July 1st, 2025, a day that will live in economic infamy for Donald J. Trump. While he was on stage at yet another boisterous America First rally, fist-pumping the chants of Tariff them all, news broke that hit harder than any protest sign. Mexico had formally joined Canada's Northern Corridor, a 9,200-kilometer freight and trade artery that bypasses the United States completely. Yes, completely. No customs checkpoints. No import fees. No negotiating with Washington. $120 billion in trade, rerouted, restructured, and now reimagined to flow from Prince Rupert, British Columbia, to Mazatlan, Mexico, all without touching an inch of U.S. soil. Trump's White House went silent. His trade team was blindsided. His base was confused. And in boardrooms across America's rusting manufacturing belt, executives began quietly panicking, because what just happened wasn't some diplomatic slight. It was a continental shift in power, and the loudest man in North America didn't see it coming.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
The trigger: Trump's 30% steel and auto tariffs. The fuse for this economic bombshell was lit months earlier when President Trump, high off his re-election and surrounded by protectionist whisperers, announced a sweeping 30% tariff on all imported steel and auto parts. It was pitched as a patriotic move to protect American workers. The real result? Chaos. Canada and Mexico, two of America's largest trading partners, weren't interested in Trump's ego-driven ultimatums. They saw the tariffs not as negotiation tools, but as a direct assault on North American supply chains. They warned, they pleaded, they offered compromise. Trump didn't budge, so they acted, quietly, boldly, permanently. The Northern Corridor, a trade route built on resistance, backed by a $3.3 billion private consortium of Canadian, Mexican, and European investors. The Northern Corridor was more than a freight project. It was a statement. We no longer need Washington's permission. The route begins at Prince Rupert, a deep-water Canadian port just 36 hours by sea from Asia, closer than even Los Angeles. It then links via high-capacity railways and smart logistics hubs through Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and across to the U.S.-Mexico border, but doesn't enter it. Instead, it dives south through Mexico's newly expanded rail network, landing at Mazatlan, a Pacific port undergoing a $1.6 billion transformation to handle ultra-large cargo volumes. Goods from Asia and Europe no longer need to cross U.S. borders. Canada and Mexico have built their own continental trade backbone. And Washington? It's been cut out of the loop. Blockchain customs, bypassing not just geography, but control. What makes this corridor even more revolutionary is what's under the hood: a blockchain-based customs data exchange that allows Canada and Mexico to share shipment data, clearance, tariffs, and inspections without U.S. oversight. Every container, every pallet, every shipment logged, verified, and cleared in real time between two sovereign governments. No middleman, no Uncle Sam dipping into the transaction. This system doesn't just eliminate delays. It eliminates U.S. customs revenue. And that revenue isn't small. The U.S. government collected over $92 billion in duties and customs fees in 2023. Nearly $4 billion of that came from Canada-Mexico trade routes. If even a fraction of that moves through the Northern Corridor, that's billions gone, vanished, slipped through Trump's fingers like sand. Midwest meltdown, U.S. manufacturing caught in the crossfire. While Trump rages on social media about disloyal neighbors and foreign betrayal, the real pain is hitting the heartland. In Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, auto plants are already feeling the sting. Why? Because integrated supply chains that once seamlessly flowed between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit now face crippling delays and 30% tariffs. At GM's Bright Drop plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, formerly a hub for electric vans built for U.S. roads, production lines have slowed to a crawl. Contracts are moving elsewhere. Workers are being furloughed. And executives are eyeing Mexico as a new final assembly point, bypassing the U.S. altogether. Auto parts makers, steel providers, and logistics firms across the Midwest are reporting similar pressure. Delays, layoffs, contract losses, and no clear direction from Washington. Why? Because Trump doesn't negotiate. He provokes. And now, he's provoked two of his closest economic allies into forming a trade partnership that makes America optional. America shut out of its own backyard. Here's what's truly stunning. The Northern Corridor doesn't just create an alternate trade path. It creates a new economic center of gravity in North America, one that doesn't orbit Washington. For decades, American geography gave it an edge. North-south trade was dependent on U.S. railways, highways, and ports. That geography was a geopolitical weapon. Now, that advantage is disintegrating. With billions poured into Prince Rupert's smart port modernization, cargo from Asia lands in Canada 2 days faster than it does in California. With Mazatlan's overhaul, Mexican exports can hit Pacific shipping lanes without ever passing through Texas. Add in the blockchain clearance system, and you got an autonomous economic network, fluid, fast, and fully functional without a single American signature. That's not a threat. That's a revolution. Trump's furious response: tweets, threats, and denial. You already know what happened next. Trump took to social media within hours of the Northern Corridor announcement, calling it illegal, unpatriotic, and a direct attack on America's economic security. He threatened to sanction Canadian rail operators, pull out of remaining NAFTA provisions, and suspend all permits for cross-border pipelines. But none of it landed, because Carney and Mexico's president had already outflanked him. This wasn't an idea or proposal. The corridor was live. Trains were running. Ports were active. Customs systems were synced. The time for tweets had passed. The realignment was underway. What Canada and Mexico did right. Let's be clear, this didn't happen overnight. It took vision, discipline, and patience. 3 things Trump's administration has never had. Canada's strategy under Carney was long-term. It focused on infrastructure over ideology, partnership over provocation, redundancy over reliance. Mexico, too, brought its A game, securing international investment, upgrading logistics corridors, and building political consensus around the idea of economic sovereignty from Washington. Together, they pulled off the most significant economic pivot in North America since NAFTA, without firing a shot, without staging a protest, and without blinking. U.S. consumers, workers, and taxpayers left behind. So who's paying the price? You are, because now U.S. importers are stuck paying tariff-inflated prices for goods they used to receive seamlessly. Retailers are warning of price hikes on everything from cars to appliances to canned goods. Construction firms are scrambling to source materials that are no longer moving through U.S. ports. And the federal government? They're facing a multi-billion-dollar revenue shortfall as customs collections plummet. It's not just bad policy. It's economic malpractice. Conclusion: a trade map redrawn without America. In 2025, Donald Trump wanted to make America the center of the economic universe. Instead, he's made it the border wall of North American trade. Let's be blunt. This isn't just a trade dispute anymore. It's an economic earthquake that's cracked open the very foundation of U.S. influence on the continent. For decades, the United States held a monopoly on trade infrastructure between its 2 closest neighbors. The highways, ports, customs, and tariffs were all carefully constructed around American control. But now, Canada and Mexico have blown a hole in that monopoly, not with threats, not with drama, but with $3.3 billion in steel, track, and logistics data. And Trump? He's standing on shaking ground, screaming at the sky while the real power moves have already been made. Let's talk numbers. Every year, over $800 billion in goods moves between the 3 North American countries. Of that, roughly 2/3 traditionally crosses through U.S. ports and inspection centers. That flow generated tens of billions in customs duties, licensing fees, inspection surcharges, fuel taxes, and administrative rents. Money straight into U.S. government coffers. Now, with the Northern Corridor in motion and fully bypassing U.S. territory, early estimates suggest $120 billion annually could be rerouted by 2026, completely avoiding the U.S. That's not a paper cut. That's a hemorrhage. And the one holding the knife? Donald J. Trump. The ripple effects, Midwest collapse incoming? If you live in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, or Wisconsin, brace yourself, because the Northern Corridor isn't some abstract infrastructure project. It's a jobs killer if you depend on North American manufacturing. Here's how the supply chain used to work. Canadian aluminum, lithium, or steel gets shipped into Michigan. It's shaped into electric vehicle parts or battery components. Those parts get assembled in Mexico. The finished product comes back through Texas or California to U.S. dealerships. It was efficient, integrated, fast. Now, that flow is rerouting. Trains that once dropped freight in Detroit are bypassing it entirely. Truckloads that once crossed into Texas are diverted to Pacific ports. Ports that once fed the Midwestern economy are seeing volumes drop by the hundreds of millions in trade value. In just 3 months since the tariff announcement, U.S. manufacturers have reported delays in critical auto components, spike in sourcing costs by 12 to 18%, early layoffs in steel fabricators and logistics providers, job losses creeping into 5 digits across tier 2 suppliers. This isn't a storm. It's a slow-motion disaster. And it's not hitting Wall Street. It's crushing Main Street, a borderless brotherhood, the new Canada-Mexico alliance. What's even more alarming for Washington is what this new corridor represents on a diplomatic level. Canada and Mexico, once framed as rivals competing for U.S. trade crumbs, have found common cause in economic self-defense. What began as a survival strategy is rapidly becoming a strategic alliance, rooted in shared values, infrastructure, and political will. Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, and Mexico's Economic Cabinet have been meeting quarterly, aligning everything from customs standards to workforce training. Joint infrastructure summits, data sharing agreements, and even a shared port security protocol have already been signed. The long-term vision? Joint supply chain zones, shared workforce development initiatives, interoperable digital logistics platforms, and eventually, a North American economic bloc that no longer revolves around Washington, D.C. That's not a trade route. That's a continent under renovation. And Trump wasn't even invited to the planning committee. The geopolitical cost, losing the leverage war. The United States has long used its geographic and economic dominance to extract concessions and enforce terms in international trade. Want access to U.S. consumers? Submit to U.S. customs. Want steel exemptions? Accept American arbitration. Want tariff relief? Be a good partner. But now that leverage is slipping away. When Canada and Mexico don't need to move goods through U.S. borders, the leverage shifts entirely. Suddenly, Washington isn't negotiating from a place of power. It's pleading from a position of loss. And guess who else is watching? Japan, South Korea, the EU, India, even Brazil. They're all quietly studying how Canada and Mexico engineered a route around the world's most volatile superpower. And when they realize that the U.S. can be bypassed, profitably, they'll start drawing their own maps. The Trump doctrine implodes. The so-called Trump doctrine on trade was built on 3 pillars. Tariffs force compliance. America is indispensable. Trade deficits mean weakness. The Northern Corridor obliterates all 3. Tariffs? They didn't bring Canada and Mexico to the table. They drove them out of the room. Indispensable? The most advanced trade corridor in North America just proved that America is entirely skippable. Deficits? Carney and Mexico's economic planners are flipping that model. They're welcoming imports that power manufacturing, knowing that finished exports to Asia, Europe, and Latin America are more valuable than chasing a surplus with Washington. Trump's trade playbook isn't just outdated. It's being replaced in real time. Retailers, ports, and unions sound the alarm. It's not just trade nerds ringing alarm bells. Retailers, dock workers, and union bosses are freaking out. Walmart, Target, and Best Buy are warning of upcoming price spikes in consumer electronics and appliances. The Port of Long Beach has seen a measurable decline in container volume, with traffic quietly shifting north to Prince Rupert and west of Mazatlan. Teamsters and longshore unions have filed grievances citing volume losses, wage reductions, and unsafe conditions due to inconsistent scheduling and unpredictable demand. And guess what? Washington has no answers, no relief, No strategy. Because the guy in charge is too busy blaming Trudeau and Mexico City to acknowledge the truth. He calls this Carney's quiet genius, letting Trump talk himself out of power. If there's a political hero in this drama, it's Mark Carney. While Trump yells, Carney builds. While Trump punishes, Carney plans. And while Trump stokes resentment, Carney cultivates relationships. He didn't scream back. He didn't retaliate with tariffs. He didn't march out of summits in a huff. Instead, he spent 2 years building an escape hatch. And then, when Trump pulled the trigger on another round of tariffs, Carney flipped the switch. That's not just leadership. That's mastery. And Trump knows it. He knows he's been outflanked, outclassed, outsmarted by a technocrat who didn't need Twitter, just track and trade law. The American dilemma, adjust or be abandoned. The question hanging over Washington now isn't, how did this happen? It's what now? The Northern Corridor is operational. The alliances are firm. The money's been spent. The trade is moving. Trump has two options: double down on tariffs, accelerate the exodus, and collapse the Midwestern economy under the weight of protectionist delusion, reverse course, admit failure, and open the door to renegotiated regional cooperation with Canada and Mexico on their terms. We all know which one he'll choose. Because Trump isn't interested in adaptation. He's addicted to domination. But domination requires leverage, and Trump just lost it. Donald Trump built his second presidency on one illusion: that America was too big to be bypassed. That no matter how loudly he slammed doors or raised tariffs, the world, and especially North America, would have no choice but to return, hat in hand, to Washington for trade access. But illusions don't hold up against facts. And the fact is, the world doesn't need permission from the United States anymore. Not when countries like Canada and Mexico are willing to put in the hard work to build alternatives. Real ones. Steel and rail, blockchain-backed, billion-dollar alternatives. This wasn't fantasy. It wasn't a theoretical rebuttal to Trump's trade bullying. It's happening. The Northern Corridor is running right now, under budget and ahead of schedule. Containers are moving. Customs are clearing. And Trump's tariffs? Irrelevant. What's exceptional now is in America. It's that its closest allies have chosen to move forward without it. The silent exodus of capital and confidence. There's a quiet trend happening behind the headlines, one that has Wall Street whispering and small manufacturers sweating. Capital is moving out of the U.S., and not just physical capital, strategic confidence. Canadian rail companies are seeing record investments. Mexican ports have become hotbeds for European and Asian shipping conglomerates. Logistics firms that once made their money moving goods through Chicago are opening offices in Vancouver, Monterrey, and Mazatlan. Even American multinationals, those that publicly support the administration for PR reasons, are privately rerouting supply chains through the corridor. Why? Because nobody wants to be held hostage by a president who governs by tantrum. Businesses crave predictability. They need rules, systems, timelines. Not threats of 30% tariffs if someone bruises the ego in the Oval Office. Carney and Mexico's leaders understood this. They didn't just build a corridor. They built a sanctuary for commerce. And investors, they're following it, container by container, away from U.S. control, losing the customs monopoly. Here's the part that really stings Washington. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is losing relevance. For decades, it was the ultimate trade checkpoint. Every cross-border truck, container, rail car had to go through American hands. That meant revenue, jobs, and, most importantly, leverage. You want to sell to the U.S.? You pay our fees. You wait in our lines. You follow our rules. But now, not anymore. The blockchain-based customs system between Canada and Mexico erases the U.S. as a third-party broker. It automates inspection reports, harmonizes regulatory codes, validates shipping manifests across two sovereign systems with no intervention from Washington. And the benefits are enormous. Faster shipping by 2 to 4 days. Zero U.S. duties or penalties. Lower costs for carriers, up to 7% in some cases. This isn't just economic efficiency. It's political independence from U.S. regulatory reach. And for a Trump administration that thrives on making country behave through customs pressure, this is a crippling blow. Retail price shock is coming. Let's be clear about where this hits hardest: the American consumer. When Canada and Mexico's trade starts bypassing U.S. ports, U.S. companies have to start sourcing differently, and that means paying more. You can't just slap a 30% tariff on imported steel and expect American construction costs to stay flat. You can't upcharge Mexican auto parts and still sell cheap sedans to working families. And you sure can't delay port shipments from Asia and expect retail shelves to be fully stocked at Christmas. Price shock is coming. Inflation, already baked into the market, will tick up again. Retailers will either pass the cost on to consumers or cut labor, inventory, and service levels to stay competitive. And as usual, it won't hit the billionaires. It'll hit the family of five in Iowa trying to buy a used minivan, the small contractor in Ohio sourcing materials for a local renovation, the mom in Georgia hoping her kids' back-to-school electronics don't spike by another $200. Trump promised to defend American jobs and families, but his trade war has delivered higher costs, fewer jobs, and an economy bleeding credibility. Washington in denial, Ottawa in control. What's the White House doing in response to this paradigm-shifting project? Rhetoric, rage, and more empty threats. Trump has floated the idea of investigating Canadian rail subsidies, a legal non-starter, threatening to pull the U.S. out of CUSMA, the NAFTA replacement, slapping retaliatory port taxes on Mexican shipments headed for Latin America, but none of it holds water. Why? Because Carney has already diversified Canada's risk. And Mexico, for all its political disagreements with Washington, has now tied its trade fate to Canada's infrastructure and Asia's markets, not DC's whims. The more Trump screams, the more power shifts north and south. And Carney? He doesn't even need to respond. He's already won the round. The proof is in the steel rails, blockchain nodes, and flowing cargo. A continental divorce in real time. We are watching the slow motion unraveling of a North American partnership that once looked unbreakable. And here's what makes it truly historic. It's not happening with hostility. It's happening with infrastructure. Canada and Mexico didn't storm out of negotiations. They didn't slap back with their own tariffs. They didn't cancel summits or insult Trump personally. They just walked away and built something better. That's more powerful than protests. More dangerous than sanctions, because it shows other countries who also fear the volatility of American policy, that there's a way out, that the U.S. is not the only door in town, that economic self-respect is possible with the right partners and the right investment. The message is clear. North America doesn't have to run through Washington anymore. America's last play, will it wake up? There's still a window, slim, fading. Washington could drop the 30% tariffs, re-enter negotiations with humility, offer customs modernization on equal footing, restore trust with long-term bipartisan trade commitments. But let's be honest, under Trump, none of that is likely, because his base doesn't want cooperation. They want dominance. They want punishment. They want America to win by making others lose. And that mindset is exactly why the U.S. is losing right now. Carney didn't beg. He didn't retaliate. He built. Mexico didn't threaten. It partnered. It upgraded. The world isn't waiting for Trump's approval anymore. It's moving on. This is a case study in what happens when leadership fails and others step up. Trump thought he could tariff his way to obedience. Instead, he tariffed his way out of relevance. He mocked allies. He scared away investment. He broke systems that had made North America the most efficient trading region on the planet. And now, as Canada and Mexico connect two oceans with steel and sovereignty, America is standing at the station, watching the train go by. This isn't a border war. It's a reconstruction of the continent's spine. And Trump, he's not driving it. He's been left behind. Because in 2025, power doesn't come from walls. It doesn't come from tariffs. It doesn't come from slogans. It comes from infrastructure, trust, and leadership. And those now live in Ottawa and Mexico City, not Washington, D.C.